Good evening, everybody. Reverend Lane and Reverend Marcus, can y'all take yourselves off of mute and let us see your handsome faces? Let me see if Dorothea, how are you, Dorothea? Can we hear you? Let's make sure we can hear you.
Yeah, hello,
We
hello,
can hear
hello,
you.
hello,
All
hello.
right.
Hola.
Amen. All right, everybody, welcome to Tuesday Together Talk. I'm Reverend Rebecca Burrow, founder and CEO of Building Reconciliation, Inclusion, Diversity, and Gender Equity. I am so excited that you all are taking time out of your busy day to spend some time with us this evening for Tuesday Together Talk. I have been looking forward to this reading actually since last year, to be honest with you, because so many people were interested in this particular speech given by Frederick Douglass. And I thought, man, this would be a great opportunity just to get a group of folks together and read the speech. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the speech, the meaning of July 4th for the Negro, tonight, hopefully, before it's all said and done, you will know a little bit more about 4th of July and why some of us choose not to get too excited about it because we recognize that our independence is not tied to 4th of July. So I am blessed to have some great folks with me tonight. And I'll just start, let's see, we'll start with Reverend Pastor, Dr. Isaac Lane. Didn't know I was coming for you, did you? How are you tonight, Pastor Lane?
I am doing well. I'm doing well. It is a blessing, honor to be a part of this tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
tell us just a little bit about yourself.
Isaac Lane. I'm from Tampa, Florida. I am the father of 5. I'm married. I just graduated with a Master's of Arts in Christian Ministry from United Theological Seminary. I serve in the executive role at First Baptist Church of Highland Pines, and blessed to be here.
All right. Thank you, Pastor Lane. Dorothea Manley Davis. Thank you. Dorothea just made it in from work. And so thank you so much for, I know we're digging into your schedule, but thank you for agreeing to be one of our readers tonight. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Dorothea.
Well, first of all, it's my pleasure to be here, and I am honored that you asked me. So I decided that no matter what I look like, I would come on and participate because I think this is an awesome opportunity. Hello to everyone. I am Dorothea Manley Davis, and I am a grandmother of 3. Wait a minute, how many grandkids I got? 4. One's on the way, like as of Thursday. Really excited about my grandkids, really excited about my children. I am working on my master's. I'm 2 classes away from my master's in public administration. Thank God, 2 classes away. I currently work for a nuclear plant where I lend them my skills in project support. I also have a nonprofit called Project Speak Life. And you're welcome to check that out on projectspeaklife.org. We are a arts and cultural organization, and we provide opportunities for people to heal through music and arts. And I am also the president and the founder or co-founder of a project called the Paducah Diversity Advisory Board, which is a board that we started to lend support and advice to our mayor and our city commissioners. So that's just some of the stuff that I do. And I'm a dear friend of Miss Rebecca, Dr. Rebecca Burrow, and blessed to be in her presence any chance I get. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. All right, my son, I saved him for last because Lord have mercy. Great guy, love him much. But man, he can be my son at times. Okay, so Reverend Marcus, go ahead. Tell the people who you are and what you do and where you do it.
My name is Marcus Derek White. I serve as an executive pastor at Allen Temple AME Church in Tampa, Florida. I'm married to Dr. Yolanda Nicole White. We have 2 sons. I also just graduated from United Theological Seminary with a Master's of Arts in Theological Studies, and I'm currently working on a second Master's at United as well.
All right. All right. So before we get into this conversation, let me say to our Tuesday Together Talk audience, please feel free to comment throughout this reading. We won't get to the comments until the end of the reading, but I want you all to feel free to chime in. If something resonates with you, just take note of it, put it in the comments, because I would love to find out, what resonates with you throughout this speech. I also want you to feel free to ask your questions, and we're getting ready to jump in. Hi, Niall. Thank you for watching. Hello, Rachel. Thank you for watching. Niall said hello, Dorothea. Hey, Lori. Hey, Karen. So grab your people. If they haven't joined in yet, grab your people. And so we're going to start in just a second. But before we do, I just wanted to real quickly remind you that Frederick Douglass escaped slavery in September 3rd, 1838. And one of the reasons why he wrote this particular speech or gave this particular speech was because he was asked to speak to the women's anti-slavery meeting there in Rochester, New York. And of course, Frederick had to let them know why he felt like, he was shouldn't necessarily be speaking on this particular 5th of July, as they were celebrating the 4th of July. But he went ahead and gave the speech, and in doing so, he made sure they understood why enslaved people were not celebrating this 4th of July. And so we shall begin, and our first reader for this evening is the Right Reverend Marcus Derek White. If the rest of the readers will mute yourselves at this time, Marcus, we're listening.
Mr. President, friends, and fellow citizens, he who could address this audience without a quarreling sensation has stronger nerves than I have. I do not remember ever to have appeared as a speaker before any assembly more shrinkingly, nor with great distrust of my ability than I do this day. A feeling has crept over me quite unfavorably to the exercise of my limited powers of speech. The task before me is one which requires much previous thought and study for its proper performance. I know that apologies of this sort are generally considered flat and unmeaning. I trust, however, that mine will not be so considered. Should I seem at ease, my appearance would much misrepresent me. The little experience I have in addressing public meetings in country schoolhouses avails me nothing on this present occasion. The papers and play cards say that I am to deliver a 4th of July oration. This certainly sounds large and out of the common way for me. It is true that I have often had the privilege to speak in this beautiful hall and to address many who now honor me with their presence. But neither their familiar faces nor the perfect gauge I think have of the Corinthian hall seems to free me from embarrassment. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, the distance between the platform and the slave plantation from which I escaped is a considerable and a difficulty to overcome in getting from the latter to the former are not by no means slight. That I am here today is to me a matter of astonishment as well as of gratitude. You will not therefore be surprised if in what I have to say is invents no elaborate preparation nor grace my speech with any high sounding of words. With little experience and with less learning, I have been able to throw my thoughts hastily and imperfectly together. And trusting to your patient and generous indulgence, I will proceed to lay them before you. This, for the purpose of this celebration, is the 4th of July. It is the birthday of your nation's independence and your political freedom. This to you is what the Passover was for the emancipated people of God. It carries your mind back to the day and to the act of your great deliverance and to the signs and to the wonders associated with the acts of that day. The celebration is also marks the beginning of another year of your nation's life. And it reminds you that the Republic of America is now 76 years old. I am glad, fellow citizens, that your nation is so young. 76 years, though a good old age for a man, is but a mere speck in the life of a nation. 70 years and 10 is the allotted time for individual men, but nations number their years by thousands. According to this fact, you are, and even now, only in the beginning of your national career. Still lingering in the period of childhood, I repeat, I am glad this is so. There is hope in the thought and hope in much needed, the underdark cloud which lowers above the horizon. The eye of the reformer is met with angry flashes, portending disastrous times, but his heart may well beat lighter at the thought that America is young and that she is still in the impressionable stage of her existence. May he not hope that high lessons of wisdom and impressionable stages of her existence, may he not hope that the high lessons of wisdom and justice and of truth will yet give direction to her destiny. Were the nations older, the patriot's heart might be sadder and the reformer's brow heavier. Its future might be shrouded in gloom and hope of its prophets go out in sorrow. There is a consolation in the thought that America is young. Great streams are not easily turned from channels worn deep in the course of age. They may sometimes rise in quiet and in stately majesty, and inundated the land and refreshing and the fertilizing of the earth with the mysterious properties. They may also rise in wrath and fury and bear away on their angry waves the accumulated wealth of years and toil and hardship. They, however, gradually flow back to the same old channels and flow as serenely as ever. But while the rivers may not be turned aside, it may dry up and leave nothing behind but the withered branches and the unsightly rock to howl in the abyss's sweeping winds, the sad tale of departed glory, as with rivers, so with nations. So, fellow citizens, I shall not presume to dwell at length on the associations that clutter about this day. The simple story is that 76 years ago, people of this country were British subjects. The style and title of your sovereign people, in which you now glory, was not then born. You were under British crown. You were under the British crown. Your father esteemed the government. You know, although a considerable distance from your home, did in the exercise of the paternal prerogatives imposed upon its colonial children, such restraints, burden, and limitations as its mature judgment it deemed wise, right, and proper. But your fathers, who had not adopted the fashionable ideas of this day of the infallibility of government and the absolute character of its acts, presumed to differ from the home government in respects to the wisdom and the justice of some of those burdens and restraints. They went so far in their excitement to pronounce the measures of government as unjust and unreasonable and as oppressive, and altogether such ought not be quietly submitted to. I sacredly need to say, fellow citizens, that my opinion of those measures fully accord with that of your fathers. such a declaration of agreement of my part would not be worth more to anybody. It would certainly prove nothing as to what part I might have taken had I lived during that great controversy of 1776. To say now that America was right and England was wrong is exceedingly easy. Everybody can say that. Not less than the notable brave can flippantly descant on the tyranny of England towards the American colonies. It is fashionable to do so. But there was a time when to pronounce against England and in favor of the cause of the colonies tried man's souls. They who did so were accounted in their days plotters of mischief, agitators, rebels, dangerous men, to side with the right against wrong, with the weak against the strong, with the oppressed against the oppressor. Here lies the merit. And the one which of all others seems unfavorable in our day, the cause of liberty may be stabbed by men who glory in the deeds of your fathers, but to proceed, feeling themselves harshly and unjust treated by the home government, your fathers, like men of honesty, the men of spirit, earnestly sought redress. They petitioned and remonstrated. They did so in decorous, respectful, and loyal ways. Their conduct was wholly unexceptionable. This, however, did not always answer the purpose. They saw themselves treated with sovereign indifferences, coldness, and scorn. They preserved, they were not the men to look back. As the sheets of anchors take a firmer hold when the ships is tossed by the storm, so did the cause of your fathers grow stronger as it breasted the chilling blast of kindly displeasure. The greatest and the best of British statesmen admitted to its justice, and the loftiest eloquence of the British Senate came to its support. But with the blindness which seems to be the unvarying characteristics of tyrants, since Pharaoh and his host were drowned in the Red Sea, the British government persisted in the extraction complained of. The madness of this course, will believe, is admitted now even by England, but we fear the lessons is woefully lost in the presence of rulers. Oppression makes a wise man mad. Your fathers were wise men. And if they did not go mad, they became resistive under this treatment. They felt themselves the victims of grievous wrongs, wholly incurable in their colonial capacities. With brave men, there is always a remedy for oppression. Just here, the idea of a total separation of colonies from the crown was born. It was a startling idea, much more so than we, at this distance of times regarded. The timid and the prudent, as has intimidated of this day, were of course shocked and alarmed by it. Such people lived then and have lived before and will probably ever have a place on this planet. And their course in respect to any great change, no matter how great the good to be attained or the wrong to be redressed by it, may be calculated with a much precision as can be the course of the stars. They hated all change, but silver and gold and copper change. Of this sort of change, they are always strongly in favor. These people were called Tories. In the days of your father, and the appellation probably conveyed the same idea that it meant by more modern, though somewhat less euphemist terms, which we often in our papers and applied in some of our old politicians. Their opposition to then dangerous thoughts was earnest and powerful, but amidst all of their terror and the frightening against it and the alarming and revolutionary ideas moved on in the country with it. And on the 2nd of July, 1776, The old Continental Congress, to the dismay of the lovers of ease and the worshipers of property, clothed the dreadful ideas with all of the authorities of national sanction. They did so in the form of resolution. And as we seldom hit upon resolutions drawn up in our days, whose transparency is at all equal to this, it may refresh your minds and help my story if I read it. Resolved that these united colonies are, and of right, ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British crown, and that all political connections between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be dissolved. Citizens, your fathers made good that resolution. They succeeded, and today you reap the fruits of their success. The freedom gained in yours, and you, therefore, may probably celebrate this anniversary. The 4th of July, at the first great fact in your nation's history, the very ring bolt in the chain of your yet undeveloped destiny. Pride and patriotism, not less than gratitude, prompts your celebration to hold it in preparatory remembrance. I have said that the Declaration of Independence is the revolt to the chain of your nation's destiny. So indeed, I regard it. The principles contained in that instrument are saving principles. Stand by those principles. Be true to them on all occasions, in all places, against all foes, at whatever cost. From the round top of your ships of the state, dark and threatening clouds may be seen. Heavy billows like mountains in the distance disclose to the leeward huge form of Fifthly Rock. The boats drawn, the chains broken, and all is lost. Cling to the day, cling to it, to its principles, with the grasp of a storm-tossed mariner to the spar at midnight. The coming into being of a nation in any circumstances is an interesting event. But besides general consideration, there were peculiar circumstances which makes the advent of this republic an event of special attractiveness. The whole scene, as I look back to it, was simple, dignified, and sublime. The population of the country at the time stood at an insignificant number of 3 million. The country was poor in the ammunition of war. The population was weak and scattered, and the country a wilderness subdued. There were no means of concert and combinations such as that exist now. Neither steam nor lightning had then been reduced in order to a discipline. From the Potomac to the Delaware was the journey of many days. Under these innumerable other disadvantages, your fathers declared for liberty and independence and triumph. Fellow citizens, I am not wanting in respect for the fathers of this republic. Signers of the Declaration of Independence were brave men. They were great men, too great enough to give fame to a great age. It does not often happen to a nation to rise. At one time, such numbers of truly great men. The point from which I am compelled to view them is not certainly the most favorable, yet I cannot contemplate their great deeds with less admiration. They were statesmen, patriots, heroes. For the good they did and the principles they contended for, I will unite with your honor in their memory. They loved their country better than their own private interests. And though this is not the highest form of human excellence, all will concede that it is a rare virtue, and that when it is exhibited, it ought to command respect. He who will intelligently lay down his life for his country is a man whom it is not human nature is despised. Your fathers staked their lives, their fortunes, their sacred honor on the cause of this country, or of their country. In their admiration of liberty, they lost the sight of others' interests. They were peacemen, but they preferred revolution to peaceful submission to bondage. They were quiet men, but they did not shrink the agitation against oppression. They showed forbearance, for that they knew its limits. They believed in order, but not in the order of tyranny. With them, nothing was settled that was not right. With them, justice, liberty, and humanity were final, not slavery and oppression. You may well cherish the memories of such men, that they were great in their day and generation. Their solid manhood stands out the more that we contrast in what degenerate times. How circumspect, exact, the proportionates were all their movements. How unlike the politicians of an hour. Their statesmanship looked beyond the passing moments and stretched away in strengths into the distant future. They seized upon eternal principles and set a glorious example in their defense. Mark them, fully appreciate the hardships to be encountered, firmly believing in the right of their cause, honorably inviting the scrutiny of an onlooking world, reverently appealing to the heavens and attesting to the serenity, sounding and comprehending the solemn responsibility that were about to assume, wisely measured and terrible odds against them. Your fathers, the fathers of the Republic, did most deliberately, under the inspiration of a glorious patriotism and with the sublime faith in a great principle of justice and freedom, lay deep cornerstones of this nation's superstructure, which has risen and still rises in grandeur around you. Of this fundamental work, this day is the anniversary. Our eyes are met with a demonstration of joyous enthusiasm. Banners and pennants wave exhaustively on the breeze. The dent of business, too, is hushed. Even the mammon seems to quit its gasp on this day. The ear-piercing fife and the stirring drums unite their accents with the ascending peal of 1,000 church bells. Prayers are made, hymns are sung, and sermons are preached in honor of this day, while the quick martial tramps of the great and multitudinous nation echo back by all the hills, valleys, and mountains of a vast continent bespeaks the occasion on one of a thrilling and universal interest, nation's jubilee.
Friends and citizens, I need not enter further into the causes which led to this anniversary. Many of you understand them better than I do. You could instruct me in regard to them. That is a branch of knowledge in which you feel perhaps a much deeper interest than your speaker. The causes which led to the separation of the colonies from the British Crown have never lacked for a tongue. They have all been taught in your common schools, narrated at your firesides, unfolded from your pulpits, and thundered from your legislative halls, and are as familiar to you as household words. They form the staple of your national poetry and eloquence. I remember also that as a people, Americans are remarkably familiar with all facts which make in their own favor. This is esteemed by some as a national trait, perhaps a national weakness. It is a fact that whatever makes for the wealth or for the reputation of Americans and can be had cheap will be found by Americans. I shall not be charged with slandering Americans if I say I think the American side of any question may be safely left in American hands. I leave, therefore, the great deeds of your fathers to other gentlemen who claim to have been regularly descended will be less likely to be disputed than mine. My business, if I have any here today, is with the present. The accepted time with God and his cause is the ever living now. Trust no future, however pleasant. Let the dead past bury its dead. Act in the living present, heart within and God overhead. I'm trying to work technology, y'all, at the same time as I'm trying to speak. I'm sorry. We have to do with the past only as we can make it useful to the present and to the future. To all inspiring motives, to noble deeds which can be gained from the past, we are welcome. But now is the time, the important time. Your fathers have lived, died, and have done their work, and have done much of it well. You live and must die, and you must do your work. You have no right to enjoy a child's share in the labor of your fathers unless your children are to be blessed by your labors. You have no right to wear out and waste the hard-earned fame of your fathers to cover your indolence. Sidney Smith tells us that men seldom eulogize the wisdom and virtues of their fathers, but to excuse some folly or wickedness of their own. This truth is not a doubtful one. There are illustrations of it near and remote, ancient and modern. It was fashionable hundreds of years ago for the children of Jacob to boast, we have Abraham to our father, when they had long lost Abraham's faith and spirit. That people contented themselves under the shadow of Abraham's great name while they repudiated the deeds which made his name great. Need I remind you that a similar thing is being done all over this country today? Need I tell you that the Jews are not the only people who built the tombs of the prophets and garnished the sepulchres of the righteous? Washington could not die till he had broken the chains of his slaves. Yet his monument is built up by the price of human blood, and the traitors in the bodies and souls of men shout, we have Washington to our father. Alas, that it should be so, yet it is. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones. Fellow citizens, pardon me, allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I or those I represent to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? And am I therefore called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us? Would to God, both for your sakes and ours, that an affirmative answer could be truthfully returned to these questions. Then would my task be light and my burden easy and delightful. For who is there so cold that a nation's sympathy could not warn him, so obdurate and dead to the claims of gratitude that would not thankfully acknowledge such priceless benefits? Who so stolid and selfish that would not give his voice to swell the hallelujahs of a nation's jubilee when the chains of servitude had been torn from his limbs? I am not that man. In a case like that, the dumb might eloquently speak and the lame man leap as a hart. But such is not the state of the case. I say it with a sad sense of the disparity between us. I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought light and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminated temple of liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems where inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me to speak today? If so, there is a parallel to your conduct. And let me warn you that it is dangerous to copy the example of a nation whose crimes, towering up to heaven, were thrown down by the breath of the Almighty, burying that nation in irrecoverable ruin. I can today take up the plaintive lament of a peeled and woe-smitten people. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down. Yea, we wept when we remembered Zion. We hanged our harps upon the willows in the midst thereof. For there they that carrieth us away captive required of us a song, and they who wasted us required of us mirth, saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion. How can I sing the Lord's song in a strange land? If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. If I do not remember thee, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. Fellow citizens, above your national tumultuous joy, I hear the mournful wail of millions whose chains, heavy and grievous yesterday, are today rendered more intolerable by the Jubilee shouts that reach them. If I do forget, if I do not faithfully remember those bleeding children of sorrow this day, may my right hand forget her cunning and my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. To forget them, to pass lightly over their wrongs, and to chime in with the popular theme would be treason most scandalous and shocking, and would make me a reproach before God and the world. My subject then, fellow citizen, is American slavery. I shall see this day and its popular characteristics from the slave's point of view. Standing there identified with the American bondman, making his wrongs mine, I do not hesitate to declare with all my soul that the character and conduct of this nation never looked blacker to me than on this 4th of July. Whether we turn to the declaration of the past or to the professions of the present, the conduct of the nation seems equally hideous and revolting. America is false to the past, false to the present, and solemnly binds herself to be false to the future. Standing with God and the crushed and bleeding slave on this occasion, I will, in the name of humanity, which is outraged, in the name of liberty, which is fettered, in the name of the Constitution and the Bible, which are disregarded and trampled upon, dare to call in question and to denounce with all the emphasis I can command everything that serves to perpetuate slavery, the great sin and shame of America. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will use the severest language I can command, and yet not one word shall escape me that any man whose judgment is not blinded by prejudice or who is not at heart a slaveholder shall not confess to be right and just. But I fancy I hear someone of my audience say, it is just in this circumstance that you and your brother abolitionists failed to make a favorable impression on the public mind. Would you argue more and denounce less? Would you persuade more and rebuke less? Your cause which would be much more likely to succeed. But I submit, where all is plain, there is nothing to be argued. What point in the anti-slavery creed would you have me argue? On what branch of the subject do the people of this country need light? Must I undertake to prove that the slave is a man? That point is conceded already. Nobody doubts it. The slaveholders themselves acknowledge it in the enactment of laws for their government. They acknowledge it when they punish disobedience on the part of the slave. There are 72 crimes in the state of Virginia, which, if committed by a Black man, no matter how ignorant he be, subject him to the punishment of death, while only 2 of the same crimes will subject a white man to the like punishment. What is this but the acknowledgement that the slave is a moral, intellectual, and responsible being? The manhood of the slave is conceded. It is admitted in the fact that Southern statute books are covered with enactments forbidding, under severe fines and penalties, the teaching of the slave to read or write. When you can point to any such laws in the reference to the beast of the fields, then I may consent to argue the manhood of the slave. When the dogs in your streets, when the fowls of the air, when the cattle on your hills, when the fish of the sea and the reptiles that crawl shall be unable to distinguish the slave from a brute, then will I argue with you that the slave is a man. For the present, it is enough to affirm the equal manhood of the Negro race. Is it not astonishing that while we are plowing, planting, and reaping, using all kinds of mechanical tools, erecting houses, constructing bridges, building ships, working in metals of brass, iron, copper, silver, and gold, that while we are reading, writing, and ciphering, acting as clerks, merchants and secretaries, having among us lawyers, doctors, ministers, poets, authors, editors, orators, and teachers, that while we are engaged in all manner of enterprises common to other men, digging gold in California, capturing the whale in the Pacific, feeding sheep and cattle on the hillside, living, moving, acting, thinking, planning, living in families as husbands, wives, and children, and above all, confessing and worshiping the Christian's God and looking hopefully for life and immortality beyond the grave, we are called on to prove that we are men. Would you have me argue that man is entitled to liberty, that he is the rightful owner of his own body? You have already declared it. Must I argue the wrongfulness of slavery? Is that a question for Republicans? Is it to be settled by the rules of logic and argumentation as a matter beset with great difficulty, involving a doubtful application of the principles of justice hard to be understood? How should I look today in the presence of Americans dividing and subdividing a discourse to show that men have a natural right to freedom? Speaking of it relatively and positively, negatively and affirmatively, to do so would be to make myself ridiculous and to offer an insult to your understanding. There is not a man beneath the canopy of heaven that does not know that slavery is wrong for him. What am I to argue? That it is wrong to make men brutes, to rob them of their liberty, to work them without wages, to keep them ignorant of their relations to their fellow men, to beat them with sticks, to flay their flesh with the lash, to load their limbs with irons, to hunt them with dogs, to sell them at auction, to sunder their families, to knock out their teeth, to burn their flesh, to starve them into obedience and submission to their masters? Must I argue that a system thus marked with blood and stained with pollution is wrong? No, I will not. I have better employment for my time and strength than such arguments would imply. What then remains to be argued? Is it that slavery is not divine, that God did not establish it, that our doctors of divinity are mistaken? There is blasphemy in that thought. That which is inhuman cannot be divine. Who can reason on such a proposition? They that can may. I cannot. The time for such argument is past. At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument is needed. Oh, had I the ability and could reach the nation's ear, I would today pour out a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. For it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened. The conscience of the nation must be roused. The propriety of the nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed. And its crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced. So what to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty and holy license, your national greatness, swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciation of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence, your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgiving, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of the United States at this very hour. Go where you may, search where you will, roam through all the monarchies and the despotisms of the old world, travel through South America, search out every abuse, and when you have found the last, lay your facts by the side of the everyday practices of this nation, and you will say with me that for revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival. Take the American slave trade, which we are told by the papers is especially prosperous just now. Ex-Senator Benton tells us that the price of men was never higher than now. He mentions the fact to show that slavery is in no danger. This trade is one of the peculiarities of American institutions. It is carried on in all the large towns and cities in one half of this confederacy, and millions are pocketed every year by dealers in this horrid traffic. In several states, this trade is a chief source of wealth. It is called the internal slave trade. It is probably called so in order to divert from it the horror which the foreign slave trade is contemplated. The trade has long since been denounced by this government as piracy. It has been denounced with burning words from the high places of the nation as an execrable traffic. To arrest it, to put an end to it, this nation keeps a squadron at immense cost on the coast of Africa. Everywhere in this country, it is safe to speak of this foreign slave trade as a most inhuman traffic, opposed alike to the jaws of God and of man. The duty to extirpate and destroy it is admitted even by our doctors of divinity. In order to put an end to it, some of these last have consented that their colored brethren should leave this country and establish themselves on the western coast of Africa. It is, however, a notable fact that while so much execration is poured out by Americans upon all those engaged in the foreign slave trade, the men engaged in the slave trade between the states pass without condemnation, and their business is deemed honorable.
Behold, the practical operation of this internal slave trade. The American slave trade sustained by American politics and American religion. Here you will see men and women reared like swine for the market. You know what it is, a swine drover, I will show you a man drover. They inhabit all our southern states. They perambulate the country and crowd the highways of the nation with droves of human stock. You will see one of these human flesh jobbers armed with pistol, whip, and bowie knife, driving a company of 100 men, women, and children from the Potomac to the slave market at New Orleans. These wretched people are to be sold singly or in lots to suit purchasers. They are food for the cotton field and the deadly sugar mill. Mark the sad procession as it moves warily along, and the inhuman wretch who drives them. Hear his savage yells and his blood-curdling oaths as he hurries on his affrighted captives. There, see the old man with locks thinned and gray. Cast one glance, if you please, upon the young mother whose shoulders are bare to the scorching sun, her briny tears falling on the brow of the babe in her arms. See, too, the girl of 13, weeping, yes, weeping, as she thinks of the mother from whom she has been torn. The drove moves tardily. Heat and sorrow have nearly consumed their strength. Suddenly you hear a quick snap, like the discharge of a rifle. The fetters clank and the chain rattles simultaneously. Your ears are saluted with a scream that seems to have torn its way to the center of your soul. The crack you heard was the sound of the slave whip. The scream you heard was from the woman you saw with that babe. Her speed had faltered under the weight of her child and her chains. That gash on her shoulder tells her to move on. Follow this drove to New Orleans. Attend the auction. See men examined like horses. See the forms of women rudely and brutally exposed to the shocking gaze of American slave buyers. See this drove sold and separated forever, and never forget the deep, sad sobs that arose from that scattered multitude. Tell me, citizens, where under the sun you can witness a spectacle more fiendish and shocking. Yet this is but a glance at the American slave trade as it exists at this moment in the ruling part of the United States. I was born amid such sights and scenes. To me, the American slave trade is a terrible reality. When a child, my soul was often pierced with a sense of its horrors. I lived on Philpott Street, Fells Point, Baltimore, and have watched from the wharves the slave ships in the basin, anchored from the shore, with their cargoes of human flesh, waiting for favorable winds to waft them down the Chesapeake. There was, at that time, a grand slave mart kept at the head of Pratt Street by Austin Woldfolk. His agents were sent into every town and country in Maryland, announcing their arrival through the papers and on flaming handbills, headed cash for Negroes. These men were generally well-dressed men and very captivating in their manners, ever ready to drink, to treat, and to gamble. The fate of many a slave has depended upon the turn of a single card, and many a child has been snatched from the arms of its mother by bargains arranged in a state of brutal drunkenness. The fleshmongers gather up their victims by dozens and drive them chained to the General Depot at Baltimore. When a sufficient number has been collected here, a ship is chartered for the purpose of conveying the forlorn crew to Mobile or to New Orleans. From the slave prison to the ship, they were usually driven in the darkness of night. For the sense that the anti-slavery agitation, a certain caution is observed. In the deep, still darkness of midnight, I have been often aroused by the dead, heavy footsteps and the piteous cries of the chained gangs that passed our door. The anguish of my boyish heart was intense, and I was often consoled when speaking to my mistress in the morning to hear her say that the custom was very wicked, that she hated to hear the rattle of the chains and the heart-rending cries. I was glad to find one who sympathized with me in my horror. Fellow citizens, this murderous traffic is today in this boasted republic. In the solitude of my spirit, I see clouds of dust raised on the highways of the South. I see the bleeding footsteps. I hear the doleful wail of fettered humanity on the way to the slave markets, where the victims are to be sold like horses, sheep, and swine, knocked off to the highest bidder. There I see the tenderest ties ruthlessly broken. No, gratify the lust, caprice, and rapacity of the buyers and sellers of men. My soul sickens at the sight. Is this the land your fathers loved, the freedom which they toiled to win? Is this the earth whereon they moved? Are these the graves they slumber in? But a still more inhuman, disgraceful, and scandalous state of things remains to be presented by an act of the American Congress, not yet 2 years old. Slavery has been nationalized in its most horrible and revolting form. By that act, Mason and Dixon's line has been obliterated. New York has become as Virginia, and the power to hold, hunt, and now as sell men, women, and children as slaves remains no longer a mere state institution, but is now an institution of the whole United States. The power is coextensive with the Star-Spangled Banner and American Christianity. Where these go, may also go the merciless slave hunter. Where these are, man is not sacred. He is a bird for the sportsman's gun. By the most foul and fiendish of all human decrees, the liberty and person of every man are put in peril. Your broad Republican domain is hunting ground for men, not for thieves and robbers, enemies of society merely, but for men guilty of no crime. Your lawmakers have commanded all good citizens to engage in this hellish sport. Your president, your secretary of state, your lords, nobles, and ecclesiastics enforce as a duty you owe to your free and glorious country and to your God that you do this accursed thing. Not fewer than 40 Americans have within the past 2 years been hunted down and without a moment's warning, hurried away in chains and consigned to slavery and excruciating torture. Some of these have had wives and children dependent on them for bread, but of this no account was made. The right of the hunter to his prey stands superior to the right of marriage and to all rights in this republic, the rights of God included. For Black men, there is neither law nor justice, humanity nor religion. The fugitive slave law makes mercy to them a crime and bribes the judge who tries them. An American judge gets $10 for every victim he consigns to slavery and $5 when he fails to do so. The oath of any 2 villains is sufficient under this hell-black enactment to send the most pious and exemplary Black man into the remorseless jaws of slavery. His own testimony is nothing. He can bring no witness for himself. The minister of American justice is bound by the law to hear but one side, and that side is the side of the oppressor. Let this damning fact be perpetually told. Let it be thundered around the world that in tyranny, that in tyrant killing, king hating, people loving, democratic, Christian America, the seats of justice are filled with judges who hold their offices under an open and palpable bribe and are bound in deciding the case of man's liberty to hear only his accusers. In glaring violation of justice, in shameless disregard of the forms of administering law, in cunning arrangement to entrap the defenseless, and in diabolical intent, this fugitive slave law stands alone in the annals of tyrannical legislation. I doubt if there be another nation of the globe having the brass and the baseness to put such a law on the statute book. If any man in this assembly thinks differently from me in this matter and feels able to disprove my statements, I will gladly confront him at any suitable time and place he may select. I take this law to be one of the grossest infringements of Christian liberty. And if the churches and ministers of our country were not stupidly blind or mostly wickedly indifferent, they too would be so regarded. At the very moment that they are thanking God for the enjoyment of civil and religious liberties, and for the right to worship God according to the dictates of their own consciences, and makes it utterly worthless to a world lying in wickedness. Did this law concern the mint, anise, and cumin? Abridge the right to sing songs, to partake of the sacrament, or to engage in any of the ceremonies of religion, it would be smitten by the thunder of 1,000 pulpits. A general shout would go up from the church demanding repeal, repeal, instant repeal, and it would go hard with the politician who presumed to solicit the votes of the people without inscribing this motto on his banner. Further, if this demand were not complied with, another Scotland would be added to the history of religious liberty, and the stern old Covenanters would be thrown into the shade. A John Knox would be seen at every church door and heard from every pulpit, and Fillmore would have no more quarter than was shown by Knox to the beautiful but treacherous Queen Mary of Scotland. The fact that the church of our country, with fractional exceptions, does not esteem the fugitive slave law as a declaration of war against the American church, of war, religious liberty, implies that church regards religion simply as a form of worship and empty ceremony, and not a vital principle requiring active benevolence, justice, love, and goodwill towards men. It esteems sacrifice above mercy, psalm singing above right doing, solemn meetings above practical righteousness, a worship that can be conducted by persons who refuse to give shelter to the houseless, to give bread to the hungry, clothing to the naked, and who enjoin obedience to a law forbidding these acts of mercy is a curse, not a blessing to mankind. The Bible addresses all such persons as scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites who pay tithe of mint, anise, and cumin. And he omitted the weightier matters of the law, judgment, mercy, and faith. But the church of his country is not only indifferent to the wrongs of the slave, it actually takes sides with the oppressors. It has made itself the bulwark of American slavery and the shield of American slave hunters. Many of its most eloquent divines, who stand as the very lights of the church, have shamelessly given the sanction of religion and the Bible to whole slave system. They have taught that man may properly be a slave, that the relation of master and slave is ordained of God, that to send back an escaped bondman to his master is clearly the duty of all the followers of the Lord Jesus Christ. And this horrible blasphemy is palmed off upon the world for Christianity. For my part, I would say, welcome infidelity, welcome atheism, welcome anything in preference to the gospel as preached by those divines. They convert the very name of religion into an engine of tyranny and barbarous cruelty, and serve to confirm more infidels in this age than all the infidel writing of Thomas Paine, Voltaire, and Bolingbroke put together have done. These ministers make religion a cold and flinty-hearted thing, having neither principles of right action nor bowels of compassion. They strip the love of God of its beauty and leave the throne of religion a huge, horrible, repulsive form. It is a religion for oppressors, tyrants, man-stealers, and thugs. It is not that pure and undefiled religion which is from above, and which is first pure, then peaceable, easy to be entreated, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. But a religion which favors the rich against the poor, which exalts the proud above the humble, which divides mankind into two classes, tyrants and slaves, which says to the man in chains, stay there, and to the oppressor, oppress on. It is a religion which may be professed and enjoyed by all the robbers and enslavers of mankind. It makes God a respecter of persons, denies his fatherhood of the race, and tramples in the dust the great truth of the brotherhood of man. All this we affirm to be true of the popular church and the popular worship of our land and the nation, a religion, a church, a worship, which on the authority of inspired wisdom, we pronounce to be an abomination in the sight of God. In the language of Isaiah, the American church might be well addressed. Bring no more vain oblations. Incense is an abomination unto me. The new moons and Sabbaths, the calling of assemblies, I cannot away with. It is iniquity, even the solemn meeting. You new moons, and you appointed feast. Your appointed feast, my soul hateth. They are trouble to me. I am weary to bear them. And when ye spread forth your hands, I will hide mine eyes from you. Yea, when you make many prayers, I will not hear you. Your hands are full of blood. Cease to do evil. Learn to do well. Seek judgment. Relieve the oppressed. Judge for the fatherless. Plead for the widow.
The American church is guilty when viewed in connection with what it is doing to uphold slavery, but it is superlatively guilty when viewed in its connection with its ability to abolish slavery. The sin of which it is guilty is one of omission as well as of commission. Albert Barnes but uttered what the common sense of every man at all observant of the actual state of the case will receive as truth, when he declared that there is no power out of the church that could sustain slavery an hour if we were not sustained in it. Let the religious press, the pulpit, Sunday school, the conference meeting, the great ecclesiastical, missionary, Bible and tract associations of the land array their immense powers against slavery and slaveholding, and the whole system of crime and blood would be scattered to the winds. And that they do not do this involves them in the most awful responsibility of which the mind can conceive. In prosecuting the anti-slavery enterprise, we have been asked to spare the church, to spare the ministry. But how, we ask, could such a thing be done? We are met on the threshold of our efforts for the redemption of the slave by the church and ministry of the country in battle arrayed against us, and we are compelled to fight or flee. From what quarter, I beg to know, has proceeded a fire so deadly upon our ranks during the last 2 years, as from the northern pulpit? As the champions of oppressors, the chosen men of American theology have appeared men honored for their so-called piety and their real learning. The Lords of Buffalo, the Springs of New York, the Lathrops of Auburn, the Coxes and Spencers of Brooklyn, the Gannets and Sharps of Boston, the Deweys of Washington, and other great religious lights of the land have, in utter denial of authority of him by whom they profess to be called to the ministry, deliberately taught us against the example of the Hebrews and against the remonstrance of the apostles that we ought to obey man's law before the law of God. My spirit wearies of such blasphemy, and how such men can be supported as the standing types and representatives of Jesus Christ is a mystery which I leave others to penetrate. In speaking of the American church, however, let it be distinctly understood that I mean the great mass of the religious organization of our land. There are exceptions, and I thank God that there are. Noble men may be found scattered all over these northern states, of whom Henry Ward Beecher of Brooklyn, Samuel J. May of Syracuse, and my esteemed friend, Reverend R.R. Raymond on the platform are shining examples. And let me say further, that upon these men lies the duty to inspire our ranks with high religious faith and zeal, and to cheer us on in the great mission of the slave's redemption from his chains. One is struck with the difference between the attitude of the American church towards the anti-slavery movement and that occupied by the churches in England towards a similar movement in that country. There, the church, true to its mission, elevating and improving the condition of mankind, came forward promptly, bound up the wounds of the West Indian slave, and restored him to his liberty. There, the question of emancipation was a high religious question. It was demanded in the name of humanity and according to the law of the living God. The Sharps, the Clarksons, the Wilberforces, the Boxtons, the Brochels, and the Nibs were alike famous for their piety and for their philanthropy. The anti-slavery movement there was not an anti-church movement, for the reason that the church took its full share in prosecuting that movement. And the anti-slavery movement in this country will cease to be an anti-church movement when the church of this country shall assume a favorable instead of a hostile position towards that movement. Americans, your Republican politics, not less than your Republican religion, are flagrantly inconsistent. You boast of your love of liberty, your superior civilization, and your pure Christianity, while the whole political power of the nation, as embodied in the two great political parties, is solemnly pledged to support and perpetuate the enslavement of 3 million of your countrymen. You hurl your anathemas at the crowded-headed tyrants of Russia and Austria, and pride yourselves on your democratic institutions, while you yourselves consent to be the mere tools and bodyguards of the tyrants of Virginia and Carolina. You invite to your shores fugitives of oppression from abroad. Honor them with banquets, greet them with ovations, cheer them, toast them, salute them, protect them, and pour out your money to them like water. But the fugitives from oppression in your own land, you advertise, hunt, arrest, shoot, and kill. You glory in your refinement and your universal education, yet you maintain a system as barbarous and dreadful as ever stained the character of a nation, a system begun in avarice, supported in pride, and perpetuated in cruelty. You shed tears over fallen Hungary and make the sad story of her wrongs the theme of your poets, statesmen, and orators, till your gallant sons are ready to fly to arms to vindicate her cause against the oppressor. But in regard to the tens of thousands of wrongs of the American slave, you would enforce the strictest silence and would hail him as an enemy of the nation who dares to make those wrongs the subject of public discourse. You are all on fire at the mention of liberty for France or for Ireland, but are as cold as an iceberg at the thought of liberty for the enslaved of America. You discourse eloquently on the dignity of labor, yet you sustain a system which in its very essence casts a stigma upon labor. You can bear your bosom to the storm of British artillery to throw off a 3-penny tax on tea, and yet wring the last hard-earned farthing from the grasp of the Black laborers of your country. You profess to believe that of one blood God made all nations of men to dwell on the face of all the earth, and have commanded all men everywhere to love one another. Yet you notoriously hate and glory in your hatred all men whose skin are not colored like your own. You declare before the world and are understood by the world to declare that you hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and yet you hold securely in a which, according to your own Thomas Jefferson, of that which your fathers charge further on your national inconsistencies. The existence of slavery in this country brands your republicanism as a sham, your humanity as a base pretense, and your Christianity as a lie. It destroys your moral power abroad. It corrupts your politicians at home. It saps the foundations of religion. It makes your name a hissing and a byword to a mocking earth. It is the antagonistic force in your government, the only thing that seriously disturbs and endangers your union. It fetters your progress. It is the enemy of improvement, the deadly foe of education. It fosters pride. It breeds insolence. It promotes vice. It shelters crime. It is a curse to the earth that supports it. And yet you cling to it as if it were the sheet anchor of all your hopes. Oh, be warned. Be warned. A horrible reptile is coiled up in your nation's bosom. The venomous creature is nursing at the tender breast of your youthful republic. For the love of God, tear away and fling from your hideous monster, and let the weight of 20 million crush and destroy it forever. But it is answered in reply to all this that precisely what I have now denounced is, in fact, guaranteed and sanctioned by the Constitution of the United States, that the right to hold and to hunt slaves is part of that Constitution framed by the illustrious fathers of this republic. Then I dare to affirm, notwithstanding all I have said before, your father basely stooped to partner with us in a double sense and keep the word of promise to the ear, but break it to the heart. And instead of being the honest men I have before declared them to be, they were the various impostors that ever practiced on humankind, on mankind. This is the inevitable conclusion, and from it there is no escape. But I differ from those who charge this baseness on the farmers of the Constitution of the United States. It is a slander upon their memory, at least so I believe. There is not time now to argue the constitutional question at length, nor have I the ability to discuss it as it ought to be discussed. The subject has been handled with masterly power by Lysander Spooner, Esquire, by William Goodell, by Samuel E. Sewell, Esquire, and last, though not least, by Jared Smith, Esquire. These gentlemen have, as I think, fully and clearly vindicated the Constitution from any design to support slavery for an hour. Fellow citizens, there is no matter in respect to which the people of the North have allowed themselves to be ruinously imposed upon as that of the pro-slavery character of the Constitution. In that instrument, I hold there is neither warrant, license, nor sanction of the hateful thing, but interpreted as it ought to be interpreted. The Constitution is a glorious liberty document. Read its preamble. Consider its purposes. Is slavery among them? Is it at the gateway? Or is it in the temple? It is neither. While I do not intend to argue this question on the present occasion, let me ask if it be not somewhat singular that if the Constitution were intended to be by its farmers and adopters a slaveholding instrument, why neither slavery, slaveholding, nor slave can where be found in it? What would be thought of an instrument drawn up, legally drawn up, for the purpose of entitling the city of Rochester to a tract of land in which no mention of the land was made? Now, there are certain rules of interpretation for the proper understanding of all legal instruments. These rules are well established. They are plain, common sense rules, such as you and I and all of us can understand and apply without having passed years in the study of law. I scout the idea that the question of the constitutionality or unconstitutionality of slavery is not a question for the people. I hold that every American citizen has a right to form an opinion of the Constitution and to propagate that opinion and to use all honorable means to make his opinion the prevailing one. Without this, the liberty of an American citizen would be as insecure as that of a Frenchman. Ex-Vice President Dallas tells us that the Constitution is an object to which no American mind can be too attentive and no American heart too devoted. He further says the Constitution, in its words, is plain and intelligible and is meant for the homebred, unsophisticated understandings of our fellow citizens. Senator Berean tells us that the Constitution is the fundamental law, that which controls all others. The Charter of our liberties, which every citizen has a personal interest in understanding thoroughly. The testimony of Senator Breeze, Lewis Cass, and many others that might be named, who are everywhere esteemed as sound lawyers, so regard the Constitution. I take it, therefore, that it is not presumption in a private citizen to form an opinion of that instrument. Now, take the Constitution according to its plain reading, and I defy the presentation of a single pro-slavery clause in it. On the other hand, it will be found to contain principles and purposes entirely hostile to the existence of slavery. I have detained my audience entirely too long already. At some future point, I will gladly avail myself of an opportunity to give this subject a full and fair discussion. Allow me to say, in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture I have this day presented of the state of the nation, I do not despair of this country. There are forces in operation which must inevitably work the downfall of slavery. The arm of the Lord is not shortened. The doom of slavery is certain. I therefore leave off where I began, with hope, while drawing encouragement from the Declaration of Independence, the great principles it contains, and the genius of American institutions. My spirit is also cheered by the obvious tendencies of the age. Nations do not now stand in the same relation to each other that they did ages ago. No nation can now shut itself up from the surrounding world and trot round in the same old paths of its fathers without interference. The time when such could be done, long established customs of hurtful character could formally fence themselves in and do their evil work with social impunity. Knowledge was then confined and enjoyed by the privileged few, and the multitude walked on in mental darkness. But a change has now come over the affairs of mankind. Walled cities and empires have become unfashionable. The arm of commerce has borne away the gates of the strong city. Intelligence is penetrating the darkest corners of the globe. It makes its pathway over and under the sea, as well as on the earth. Wind, steam, and lightning are its charged agents. Oceans no longer divide, but link nations together. From Boston to London is now a holiday excursion. Space is comparatively annihilated. Thoughts expressed on one side of the Atlantic are distinctly heard on the other. The far off and almost fabulous Pacific rose in grandeur at our feet. The celestial empire, the mystery of ages, is being solved. The fight of the Almighty, let there be light, has not yet spent its force. No abuse, no outrage, whether its taste, sport, or variance, can now hide itself from the all-pervading light. The iron shoe, the crippled foot of China must be seen in contrast with nature. Africa must rise and put on her yet unwoven garment. Ethiopia shall stretch out her hand unto God. In the fervent aspirations of William Lloyd Garrison, I say, and let every heart join in saying it, God speed the year of Jubilee, the wide world o'er, when from their galling chains set free, the oppressed shall vilely bend the knee, and wear the yoke of tyranny, like brutes no more. That year will come, and freedom's reign. To man his plundered rights again restored. God speed the day when human blood shall cease to flow. In every clime be understood the claims of human brotherhood, and each return for evil good, not blow for blow. That day will come all feuds to end, and change into a faithful friend each foe.
Thank you. that concludes our speech for this evening by Frederick Douglass, The Meaning of July 4th for the Negro, a speech given at Rochester, New York on July 5th, 1852. I would like to thank all of my readers. First reader, Marcus Derek White. Second reader, myself. Third reader, Dorothea Manley Davis. Fourth reader, and the one that is still here because he was or is the fourth reader, Pastor Isaac Lane. So Pastor, we had a couple of comments. I think people were just really excited about the reading. And I tell you, I so appreciate how you closed that out. Of course, that was the poem at the end that Frederick put at the end of the speech. But before we go, I just want to ask you real quick, what resonates with you regarding this speech?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation to be a part of this. I'm very humbled to be a part of this. I think this is great. And when you sent it out, we were looking over it again. The biggest part of this speech that stuck out to me was how Frederick Douglass, was calling the church out on the carpet.
Yes.
The church as a whole, the Black church as well, calling the church out on the carpet for its role that it played in slavery, and for its lack of trying to create traction to abolish slavery. But at the same time, he did acknowledge that there was some people in Christianity and some white brothers and sisters who actually were on the front lines fighting for it. And that just stuck with me because it seems like Frederick Douglass, even all the way back then, he clearly understood that if any true change is going to take place in America, then the true church has to be on the front lines. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing that stuck out with me, and it sticks out to me right now. If any true change is going to take place in our country today, the church has to be on the front lines of society and shining that light.
Yeah. That's well said. I know that was one of the things that when I read the speech for the first time, I was like, oh man, Frederick is laying it out.
Yes.
He's holding the church accountable. But I also realized that throughout his speech that nobody was safe from his words of truth.
Nobody.
Everyone that has a part to play in society, no matter what their role is, has a responsibility to fight for the freedom and liberty of all human beings.
Right.
And that's why I think this speech is so relevant even today. We are living in a society where just trying to talk about things such as critical race theory, the 1619 Project, those sorts of things, the whole border issue and who belongs in the country and who's not supposed to be in the country and all those things. We have a responsibility to fight for the freedom and liberty of all human beings. And so that really stands out to me. And also, as you indicated, it is the church's responsibility to be on the forefront, not to sit in the back and wait for somebody else, to take the reins and run with it. We need to be doing some work. And so he called out us preachers, us ministers, doctors of divinity, and all of us. And so I'm hoping that as the audience was listening today, that now you would think about how you will spend your 4th of July. And maybe you'll read the speech again. I'll make sure that I drop a link to the speech in the comments. Maybe you'll read it again. Maybe you'll read it with your family. I mean, it's your decision how you celebrate your 4th of July. But I want to make sure that as you do celebrate your 4th of July, make sure you consider how this speech is still relevant for people today that are being, in a sense, held in bondage because of who they are, who they love, how they, who they worship. We have to make sure that we aren't the ones that are trying to confine people in bondage and oppressing people, whether that's gender, race, ethnicity, whatever it is. We just have to be sure that we are the ones leading in liberation. Pastor, any closing remarks before I let you go take care of your wife and your 5 children?
No, once again, I'm just thankful that you thought about me to be a part of this, and this is great. And I look forward to sharing this speech with my children on this 4th of July. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, Tuesday Together Talk audience. Thank you all so much. Please continue to drop your comments in the comments section. Head on over to Tuesday Together Talk Take 2 if you're a part of that private group. Make sure you head over there and continue this discussion. I am Reverend Rebecca Burrell. I will see you all next week. But before I go, July begins actually it's our 1-year anniversary. And so I want to make sure that you remind people to like and follow us. Introduce them to Tuesday Together Talk. Let them know what they're missing. Let them know what we're over here trying to do on Tuesday Together Talk and how they can become part of the conversation. You can always find us at www.reconciliationandequity.com, or you can follow us on Facebook at Reconciliation and Equity. You can also find us on Instagram at Reconciliation and Equity. Remember, we are on a mission to create a more just, equitable, and inclusive world, and we need your help to do it. All right. God bless you all. Thank you again to all of my readers. Thank you again for being attentive Tuesday Together Talk audience. And I hope to see you all again next week. God bless you. Good night. Good night, Pastor Lane.